And I think a big part of it from my experience is that whenever you take like shrooms or acid or something, I think two big things happen in my mind, at least. And the first one is that your ego goes down. And so it's easier to kind of facilitate those conversations while being the second thing, which is a lot more empathetic. I think it just opens up your empathy whenever you're talking to people and you're on psychedelics.
This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Our goal is to educate and inform others about the realities of substance use in an engaging and entertaining format. We share these experiences so you can experience them without trying them yourself. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to attempt to recreate anything found in this episode or in any of our other content. We are not confessing to any acts stated in this podcast. The content in this episode should not be treated as factual or real in any way.
Magic mushrooms might be able to cure addiction.
For people suffering with severe PTSD, the benefit of talk therapy could be greatly improved with an unlikely drug, MDMA, popularly known as ecstasy.
Could a drug stop suicidal thoughts in hours? Well, there is a drug. It's called ketamine. It's an anesthetic, also used illicitly as a club drug, and it's now being used by some doctors who have patients in a serious suicidal state.
You're listening to Modern Day Hippie, the podcast about doing drugs in a responsible, fun, and safe way to improve your life. We're your hosts, Yuki and Reggie, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Just a heads up, the first few minutes of this episode have some NSFW sexually explicit content, so if you're not comfortable with that for whatever reason, then just fast forward to about minute 10 of the pod. Thanks.
Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the pod. Today, we had a bit of a plan of something we wanted to talk about, but I had a story recently that was a topic that I wanted to dive a little bit more into, which is specifically how drugs other than alcohol can work really well for kind of group bonding situations and just like getting to know people a little bit better. And I had a really good experience doing that a couple of weeks ago, specifically with mushrooms. And I think there's a lot of potential with psychedelics there. So we'll be talking about that on today's pod. But first, Reggie, I know you had a good Valentine's Day experience recently. You want to tell us a little bit about that and the drugs that were involved there?
Oh, God. So, trigger warning. I apologize in advance if this is something that you don't want to hear. But Valentine's Day, I've been dating this girl recently, right? And things have been going pretty well. And so I kind of went pretty hard on Valentine's Day, like pulled out a bunch of the stops, the rose petals, the wine, the dinner making, all that stuff. And so if you guys go to your local plug, you may have noticed, and especially if you're in a bigger city, you may have noticed that a lot of them sell Viagra and or Cialis or Blue Chews or something along those lines. And you might be thinking like, oh, why does a plug need to sell like dick pills? Well, it makes a lot of sense when you think of like if you've been drinking or if you're like on MDMA or if you've even just done too much coke, like it oftentimes will affect your dick getting hard.
Yeah, I'm definitely a very satisfied one-off user of Cialis in a drug-related experience. So can confirm.
Yeah, so I had some pills laying around, never used them before, of Viagra. And on Valentine's Day, I just had a lot to drink, frankly. And then things got intimate. Like she like pulled me into my own bedroom and I was like, damn, all right, I see how this is. And so I was like, fuck it, let me try this because I already know my dick's not going to work because I've had way too much to drink.
Okay, hold on. Wait, so you just randomly bought these pills? Like you must have had some thought or plan of like using these when you had bought them. Like you don't just have like Viagra laying around. Like that's not.
Dude, it was a suggestion from one of my friends, like just to keep it on hand. And like, so I saw some YouTube short or something where someone was talking about how like, yeah, man, like sex with Viagra is just so much better. Like even if you don't need it, like, and so I was like, fuck it, dude, like I gotta try this at some point. Like, but the first pill I got, was actually just given to me by a friend who told me I need to try it. Like, okay. And I was like, I don't need this, man. He's like, no, just trust me on this one. Just try it. And I was like, no. Not medical advice or anything, guys. So I guess like before I get into taking the Viagra, just really quick side note. Whenever I was like doing research on like what you can and can't take with Viagra, apparently you're supposed to avoid grapefruit products because that could like lower the effectiveness. And apparently grapefruit can lower the effectiveness of a lot of prescription drugs, which I didn't know, but little fun facts there.
Yeah.
Don't eat grapefruit and try to pop one. But yeah, so I took the Viagra, and holy shit. Like I just didn't even think I could just keep going, and then I ended up like having sex 3 times in a row, like on that. And like every time, like I would like finish and I'd be like, okay, yeah, there's no way. Like my body's like destroyed. Like I would just literally like 5-10 minutes later, I'd be hard as a rock again, and I'd be like, fuck it, I guess I'm ready to go. Like yeah, definitely helps when you're drunk.
Yeah, I totally believe that. Like, I've never tried Viagra, but Cialis, I assume, is pretty similar. And my one experience with it was I knew for a while I had this like MDMA trip, like roll coming up with my girlfriend. And I was like, just knowing myself, like when I'm on drugs, for me personally, like sex is like the last thing I think about. I'm too like spaced out to even think about my like genitals or my penis. I'm like, I forget that I have a dick when I'm on drugs. I'm just like too busy looking at rocks and shit, which is like fun most times. But sometimes it's like, hey, you know, if you want to have sex, usually it's tougher for sure than I think the average person. But I got some Cialis, and dude, that shit worked great. Had literally the best sex of my life. Granted, it was also Molly sex. But
dude, did it not ruin sex for you? Like,
it doesn't quite ruin it. Like, I think I understand what people mean when they say that having sex on Molly ruins regular sex. It's definitely like the best sex you will ever have, hands down. But it's like, I still enjoy regular sober sex too. Obviously it's not the same, but it's just like, it's different categories, you know, it's like apples and oranges to an extent. And like,
that's fair. Yeah.
Like regular sex is still great. Like it's still very fun and a good experience. And Molly is just like it's like a different echelon. It's like a different universe in some ways. And yeah, thanks to Cialis, literally had sex for like 8 hours.
Oh my God.
Which was,
holy shit. How many rounds did you go?
It was kind of a blur, honestly, on that side. But it was good. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Have you had acid sex or shroom sex?
Yeah, definitely on shrooms. Never when I was tripping super hard, because again, if I'm tripping really hard, literally, like I just am not conscious of being like of sex, like being a thing. That's just like not where my mind goes. I've had it on like smaller doses, but never when I'm tripping super fucking hard. Honestly, it's something that I should have on my list.
Dude, there was sorry, I know that we have a topic that we were going to talk about, but real quick. I remember the first time I had acid sex, it was me and my ex, and we were both tripping. And we were just like an extremely, what's the word? I guess we were just an extremely horny couple, frankly. Like we were just having sex all the time. And so it was just habit.
I
like,
can
even
confirm.
Yeah, it was bad, man. And when we were having sex, I was on top of her, and I put my hands on hers. And whenever our hands touched each other and like closed, they made like a farting noise. And I swear, at the same exact time, like my dick just shot out of her, and like her like pussy just contracted, and we were just both laughing our asses off like for like a solid 2 minutes. Like immediately forgot that we were having sex because we were tripping, and just started dying laughing. And then like 2 minutes later, we just like resumed it, and it was great. It was like fireworks in my brain. I don't know, but it's just hilarious to me that like things like that can happen, and just like honestly, it almost makes you closer to that person because it's such a weird experience to have, right? Like,
yeah, it definitely makes you like even more vulnerable. Like obviously, just being naked with someone and having sex is like the upper echelon of just vulnerability, like between human beings. But even then, like, yeah, if you can like laugh about something funny, or if you can have like the closeness of psychedelics while you're doing that with another person, it's honestly a pretty magical experience. Like every time that I do psychedelics with, whether it's my girlfriend, whether it's friends, whether we've tripped together like a dozen times or for the first time, it's just such a like high quality like togetherness experience as human beings. Like it's great.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, that brings us quite nicely into the main topic for today. So I was kind of inspired to talk about this because I believe it was 2 weeks ago. I was staying with some friends for like a couple of weeks on like a extended trip. And I knew these guys like a decent amount. Like we'd met, we had hung out a few times, but we're not like best buds. We don't like talk like every day or every week. Just well enough to like, be cordial and like, oh, we get along. Like it's like, oh, that guy's chill. But we'd never done any form of drugs together. Like I don't really drink. And even them, like they don't drink a whole lot. It's not like get plastered and like make memories around that. Just like very chill, everyone's kind of a little bit older and out of that heavy drinking phase. And so we had one night when we, all agreed to take varying amounts of shrooms. So we took the shrooms. We were in Colorado. It was like snowy and really cold. So we started off with probably like 30, 45 minutes in the hot tub, just chilling, listening to music, like kind of coming up on the mushrooms. And then we went back inside. And, we all like took our separate showers and stuff. And by the time we were all done, we were all definitely tripping a good amount. And I took like a decent amount where I was tripping like pretty hard. And the other guys took still a decent amount, but not quite as much. And it was just really nice. Like when you're in that setting, when you and everyone else is like on the same drugs as you, even if it's to slightly different extents, you just feel a lot more comfortable automatically. It's like, oh, these people kind of like get like where I'm at right now, even if I'm like, if I say something like stupid or weird or do something strange, like, they're like, oh, it's okay. Like we're all on mushrooms. It's chill.
I love that.
And what we did then was with this group, our thing was like almost every night we'd play a game of Catan to the point where it became like kind of a meme. And we're like, dude, let's just try playing Catan on mushrooms. Probably not going to be like super smooth game. That's okay. Like I mentioned, we're all on the same page. We're all going to have fun with it. And that was a great time, played out the full game and did some fuck shit. I think I went with some like stupid strategy that didn't work at all, but we were just having fun and like laughing and kind of memeing the whole time. And then after that, we watched this TV show. It's called The Rehearsal. I don't know if you've heard of it or
No.
know what it is. Okay, so also you should watch the TV show if you're listening right now. Like, check the show out. It's honestly like pretty mindfuck, even if you're watching it sober.
What is it on? Like, where do you watch it?
Yeah, it's on HBO. But the context for the show is there's this comedian guy whose name is Nathan Fielder. He's this like Canadian comedian, and his whole shtick is that he's just like really awkward, like to the point where when you watch him, it's like kind of cringy. But he just like turns into these like pretty funny situations. And so he had an original show called Nathan For You that I think was on Comedy Central, where he's kind of this like consultant for like small businesses, and he comes up with like really stupid ideas to try to like get them traction. So one of them was like an ice cream shop, and that they should sell ice cream that like looks like poop and like smells like poop. And they're like kind of they're just these really dumb recommendations, but it's kind of like these interactions with real people and real business owners. And he had a few bits that like got pretty big. Like he made a parody of a Starbucks store called Dumb Starbucks, which got on like national news, literally had like lines out the door, like literally like a physical place somewhere in LA, I think. And he ended up shutting it down after a day or two because he got like a cease and desist from Starbucks. But his idea was like, oh, you can use parody law to like help a struggling local coffee shop by like kind of ripping off like the Starbucks brand, kind of as a joke. But he started this new show that I think came out like a year ago or something called The Rehearsal. And the whole idea is helping people like literally like real random people that he literally gets off of Craigslist to rehearse these like important events coming up in their lives. So like a job interview or like having a conversation that they're scared to have with like a friend or a family member. And that's kind of where the show starts, but it just goes in like such a crazy direction. Like, watch this show. If you're watching on some drugs, even better. It'll absolutely blow your mind. Like, it's definitely worth just like to get HBO for a month, watch it. You can finish it in like a night or two. And I think we watched the first like 5 out of 8 episodes on that night that we did shrooms.
That sounds awesome. Definitely gonna
Yeah,
watch
yeah,
shrooms.
yeah. And this guy's like a kind of a comedic genius in like a very specific, strange way. Um, but like, we had these like shared experiences while we were on shrooms. Also did a good amount of just like talking, like when we were in the hot tub, like coming up on the shrooms, and even like during Catan and before and after that, just some good talking experiences. And it made me realize that just throughout my life, like the drug that I most frequently did in social situations was alcohol. And like alcohol has this, neat effect of really lowering people's inhibitions. And I'm sure we've all experienced it. You go to some social event, you have a few drinks, it just kind of opens you up and makes you more comfortable with like the people around you and the people there. But most of the times when I've taken other drugs, primarily like psychedelics, like mushrooms, acid, 2C, it's been with people who I already know and am comfortable with. So it's like, I already know these people. We're going to do drugs together. Like, obviously, we're going to have a good experience. But this was the first time where it was people who I knew at like less of like a deep certain level. It was just like one of the best bonding experiences I've had with just like a group of like familiar people, but not like the closest friends, in just like, a period of an evening and a night. And it really made me appreciate the fact that especially psychedelics can really help facilitate those connections. And it's something that I don't think we appreciate. It's like, oh, you go out for a night of drinking and it's like, oh, that's really good for bonding people. But it's like, I think psychedelics can do that even more effectively. Obviously, we have a ways to go until society gets on board with that. And hopefully one day it will. But definitely something I would recommend. And especially if you're getting more comfortable with psychedelics and things that aren't as intense as like taking 2 tabs of acid. I think even just doing like a bit of shrooms in a social situation, especially when the other people there will also do some, I think can be a really great kind of just excuse to like bond and be like a little bit more vulnerable with each other, like not being scared to just like have like deeper conversations or just like act goofier than you usually might.
Dude, I couldn't agree more, man. We used to call it the shrooms bond. Like every time
Oh,
you would
really?
trip with someone for the first time that you didn't know that well, you felt like you were their best friend afterwards almost. And it's like, it's just that shrooms bond, And I think a big part of it from my experience is that whenever you take like shrooms or acid or something, I think 2 big things happen in my mind, at least. And the first one is that your ego goes down. And so it's easier
Right.
to kind of facilitate those conversations while being the second thing, which is a lot more empathetic. I think it just opens up your empathy whenever you're talking to people and you're on psychedelics. But maybe that's just my experience. What do you think about that?
No, I completely agree. I think like both those points are, I think, very like acute and wise. On the ego bit, like that's really part of it. If you take enough psychedelics, you experience ego death, where you just lose your sense of self. And I think like what most people experience with the second point with the empathy aspect is a lot of times when people do psychedelics, they really want to do it outdoors, like out in nature, because it, as like hippy dippy as this sounds, it really makes you feel more kind of one with nature, with like, the trees and the rocks and the water. But I think part of that is it really kind of makes you like pause a little bit and like appreciate those things. Like, oh, hey, I never knew like, this like field of grass or like these rocks that I would just walk by, like have these like cool details to them and these aspects. And I think you can very much refocus that energy on also the people you're hanging out with and around. And like the context where I most frequently experience this is my girlfriend and I take shrooms together on a very regular basis, like every other week, probably on average. And whether it's like conversationally or if it's literally just like cuddling on the couch and watching a TV show, it very much brings a greater sense of like appreciation for that other person that is like there next to you, and understanding that, they're like a human with, goals and aspirations and faults and mistakes, like just as much as each of us are. And I think there's very few things that can really snap that into perspective for you, like psychedelics.
Yeah, man, they're pretty magical in that way. It just puts you in a different state of mind that is just superior when it comes to certain human connections, in my opinion. Like,
yeah, I completely agree.
And I think one of the coolest parts about it, compared to alcohol especially, is that you remember everything. And both people remember everything that happened, versus on alcohol, like oftentimes people will start getting all lovey-dovey when they're drunk, and then they barely even remember it the next day, or they don't remember it at all, and it's like, was that even real? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I remember, especially when I used to drink a lot, like I was definitely guilty of that on many occasions. And yeah, exactly. And I remember there was this phrase that I think people would throw around a lot when we were in college, that was some form of like alcohol brings up like your true emotions or what you really think or feel. But I don't fully agree with that. I think to some extent that is true, but I think it just makes you more willing to act on your impulses, which in many cases do not reflect like your actual like emotions or feelings or like what you want. I think we all have like impulses, and usually when we're not drunk and we have our normal level of inhibitions, we're like, okay, these impulses are just like illogical and just we don't need to like follow through with them. Like I think everyone has like some form of intrusive thoughts, and like I think that's just part of being human to an extent. But I think especially when you're drunk, you are like much more willing to act on those thoughts, and I don't think that's a fair reflection of like your feelings or what you actually want.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you agree with that?
I 100% agree with that. It also gets people into trouble. Like,
yeah, completely. I have been there. Yeah, no, and actually on the note of drinking as socializing, so about a week ago, I had my first time drinking in probably like 6 to 9 months or something, like some pretty freaking long time. And it was a very good reason to drink. Literally, it was actually something like business related / work related, like working with a company that like deals in the alcohol space, and just had like honestly like a really good night, like out with them, like drinks and dinner, and like the places where we went had very nice like additions of this company's like beverages that they sell, and it was an experience that I genuinely appreciated. I was like, to me, that was like the upper echelon of an experience that I could have on alcohol. Part of it being the fact that like what we were drinking was actually made so much sense in the context. Like we were able to appreciate the liquor that we were drinking, because it's like, oh, like this is the company that made it. And we kind of understand just like the process and the craftsmanship that goes into it. Like, that was cool. Like it was cool to experience the alcohol itself in that setting and in that context. And then on the other level, like as a social experience, it was nice. It was like this kind of like team bonding, like business relationship. But it was nice because it kind of lowered everyone's like inhibitions, like just enough to where, very free flowing conversation. Some of it like business and work related, some of it just about like our lives and our families. And I was just flowed very well. And honestly, at the end of that night, like did feel like we had just a really strong relationship, like with that business that we're working with, and like kind of all the people involved in that dinner. So I really appreciated that experience of it. But even like later that night, especially the following day and beyond that, I was just like, just reminded once again of like how
brain fog, bro.
Not worth it is. And
how long do you have brain fog for?
This is going to sound like bullshit, but I feel like I'm still feeling it to an extent.
Jeez.
Literally a week later.
A week?
Like,
damn.
Yeah.
I believe it.
Just over a week. And it's very subtle. It's not in the day to day, but it's like, I definitely feel more like sluggish than I usually do in the mornings. I don't feel as great to get out of bed. Like usually I'll get out of bed. First thing is I'll just go outside. I'll go for like a short jog / walk, like nothing super intense, more just to get myself outside. And usually I'm like pretty good about getting into that. I feel like even now it's like weighing on me a little bit. Don't feel quite as sharp. I'm like, I need to go to bed earlier, stuff like that. So there could also be some confounding variables there. And at the end of the day, I think to an extent it is in my head. But even not like the day after that night was a complete wash. I was like, wasn't able to be productive one bit. I couldn't get anything done. It was terrible. And I remember like calling my girlfriend and kind of reflecting on this experience, like to her. And my conclusion was that even in like the best case scenario of consuming alcohol, which I think that this case like really exemplified that, it's not even as good as just like the average scenario on psychedelics. And then the downside to it is just like so much worse. Like on psychedelics, the next day you're like totally fine, like no effect, not at all. And even this past weekend, like we went to a rave, I did a good amount of ketamine and had a solid time. And also next day, like felt totally fine, like no form of a hangover. And I'm like, dude, the fact that just like drinking just knocks my ass down to this extent more than like all these other drugs, dude, which I think a lot of people consider to be like harder and more intense, is just like mind blowing.
Yeah, man, I feel you. After I drank on Valentine's Day, the next day I was just like not okay. And it wasn't just like a hangover or anything. Like I was definitely hungover to an extent, but just the heartburn from drinking wine, like the physical heartburn, bothered me so much. I couldn't even go to sleep that night properly.
Wow.
Like I had to like prop up a bunch of pillows and, you know, pop a bunch of Tums. Like, and then the next day I was just still experiencing heartburn the entire day and just like felt like shit. So like, and that's just from alcohol, man. Like it's just so not worth it sometimes. Like most times, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. I think like drinking obviously was the first substance that you or I did, and obviously for most people it's just what's acceptable. And it's like when that's all you know, like that's your standard. That just becomes your context. You know, like you're hungover, you feel like shit the next day. That's just become like a meme in a sense. It's like you and all your buddies, you wake up, you text each other like, oh, I feel like shit. And everyone else is like, oh, I feel like shit too. And just, you know, we've all accepted that because everyone's kind of on the same page there. And obviously, like, you know, can't blame people for that being the only experience they have for the vast majority of people. I'm just really excited for, you know, more substances such as psychedelics to kind of get more of a mainstream hold so that people can see like you can do drugs, you can experience these substances and have a great time on them and not have these absolutely miserable side effects. And I even experienced this on the occasional cases when I'll go out like to a bar or a club, like in my city with friends. The next morning they'll be like, oh, I feel like shit. Like I can't get up. And I'm like, dude, I'm fine. Like, I'm waking up Sunday morning. We're going to the farmer's market. It's like, it's great. I'm just having a nice time outside. If I drank, I'd be fucking miserable. It was like, don't take me out of bed before like 3 p.m.
Yeah, man, it's literally poison, dude. Alcohol's so overrated. It sucks. It sucks how many people are into it because it's legal, and that just encourages more people to do it, which just leads to that mass shitty feeling like you were saying.
And I mean, it's the oldest drug known to man, so it is very much part of the human experience. I think on a very like visceral level. Final note: I heard or read something yesterday that I thought was super interesting, and it's that like the consumption of alcohol, especially in social settings, it's not only encouraged, but it's like celebrated in most societies. But, you know, even just like in the US where we live, like it is like celebrated to go out and get drunk with your friends or your coworkers. That's how you like decompress on the weekends. That's how you like get distance from your work and your normal life. And the fact that like our culture celebrates that, and that's also obviously propped up by these massive alcohol companies and their lobbies and this massive industry that like, you know, lives off of that and makes all of its money off of that. I think is important to keep in mind. And that's not to say that, you know, there are companies that will profit massively off of cannabis or mushrooms or whatever else becomes like more decriminalized and legalized down the road. But it's helpful to think of like, what are the incentives that these people have, to sell like as much booze as possible to me and to everyone around me.
Yeah, pretty wild.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, thanks for listening, guys. And that's today's pod. Thank you guys so much for listening. We really fucking appreciate y'all. If you want to show us some love, it would actually mean the world to us. If you're listening on YouTube, drop the video a like and the channel a subscription. And if you're listening on a podcast, just leave us a quick rating. These few seconds of your time go a really long way in helping us out. If you want to hit us up with questions, episode ideas, or anything else, you can reach us on Twitter at MDHpod or email us at mdhpod@gmail.com. Finally, we're just getting started with the pod, and our promise to you is to make every episode